Hi guys, welcome from Pax Europiana. This time I have upgraded my facilities a bit. I have here my NATO flag. You will see that quite often. And here my big NATO flag in the background here in my place here in Vienna. I'm broadcasting obviously for Austria to join NATO, but also today it's quite a dramatic week because of the fall of Kabul. And all the people who always hated the West and NATO, they are now proclaiming the end of the West, the end of NATO, the end of America, the end of everything. The new world order is come, run by Russia and China and the Taliban. I want to make this video to call everybody as tragic the situation is. It is really tragic, and I'm very sorry for all the people we had to leave behind and who were left behind in this tragic and badly organized withdrawal. But I want to remind everybody that we, the West, the NATO, it was already leaving Afghanistan in 2011. It is a decade of withdrawal already. Most of the forces, they have left a decade ago during the first Obama withdrawal. That was very questionable if that was necessary, but there everybody was in favor. And then it was basically just a token of forces left. And then Trump, and with the kind of tutelage of Putin, has anyhow made this deal with the Taliban. So what exactly was to win now in this situation? In 2020, everything was lost when Pompeo made this outrageous kind of peace deal with the Taliban. So Biden's options were very limited now to re-engage fully into a very complicated mess, or to basically withdraw and accept the terrible reality of this chaotic defeat and withdrawal. That's of course very tragic, and it's very heartbreaking, but we should also make some clarity in this debate, and that's my reason for this video. First of all, the NATO is the defense of free Europe against Russia. It's not a global organization for everything that ever is wrong in the world. This is a bit overburdening NATO. We cannot right every wrong in the world. We cannot impose democracy on everybody militarily. That was never the idea. The NATO was created under the hammer blow of the Soviet aggression in 1947 when they took over Eastern Europe, and when China was falling, and then NATO as a response was to at least save free Europe by the Americans. And this is the nature of NATO to this day, to save free Europe from aggressive Russia. And since 20 years, Russia is aggressive again, especially since 2008. The real question is how much free Europe NATO should guarantee. And that's the real decisive issue. And I actually like the comparison which some commentator made after the fall of Saigon, because a lot of people compare it with Saigon, and it's tempting. Obviously, 1975, 1990 was the year of victory, 1989 even. Just 14, 15 years after the fall of Saigon, and the Soviet Union broke in its constituent republic and was gone. 16 years later, in 1991, 30 years now. And we had the unprecedented growth phase in all aspects, and the success of the last 30 years or since victory in the Cold War is unprecedented in global history in terms of prosperity and in terms of increase of people who live in freedom. So the real question is, what means the fall of Kabul? It's of course a military defeat, it's a tragedy, and I'm calling also for some of the guys who have not prepared, because again, it was since the 1st of May very clear that this will happen. It was decided actually to leave on the 1st of May already. Now that it's middle of August, and now it came much faster, and that was also avoidable, but nevertheless, the tactical situation is a defeat. Strategically, please let now the Russians and the Chinese sort out the mess they very much helped to create. And Russia was very much a facilitator, and China as well thinks it's the profiteur from this situation. They have now a new client state, and then let's see if they can get some kind of decency out of the Taliban. But this is certainly not our taxpayer money should be used for that. Obviously, we should be generous with the people we had employed. The West has helped and educated, and now obviously it will be up several hundreds and thousands of Afghans who really believe in what the West is for. They work for Western interests and companies and organizations, NGOs. Look, if they want to come, then let them come. We have enough resources and we can accommodate them. And we should be generous. And obviously, we should also prepare for a future when there will be time for a free Afghanistan. But as I've made many videos, let's never forget, the Afghans, as long as they want to have a unified state where one ideology or group is suppressing the others with the help of and imposing its lifestyle on the choices or religious or ethnic preferences, ideological preferences on everybody else, it will not work. So Afghanistan needs to be dissolved the same like Yugoslavia. If they want to have a common state, we can anyhow not help them for this moment. And so it's really for the Chinese and the Russians to sort out the mess they have created, yeah? And they help to create. So good. Now, let's discuss what is really important, because what is really important at the moment is that we have clarity in the system what NATO should do in Europe, because that's ultimately the task of NATO. And here it's very logically, when the moment comes, we have now to integrate Kosovo, Bosnia, and Ukraine and Georgia, and also Moldova. These are the 5 most urgent integration cases for the NATO, and to secure their future. But obviously all countries have to make also the efforts to make sure that this is happening. Kosovo and Bosnia is already quite clear, because they are settled cases of mature democracies where the situation is clear. The territory is clear, and the situation is clear, and anyhow NATO is securing them already in the present form via KFOR and IFOR, so it's ultimately not a big issue. And they need to be reassured in this crisis, because obviously our enemies want to shake the fundament of our value order with the fall of Kabul. They hope for a kind of domino effect. The Serbs hope like that, and this Malagurski I had this kind of Twitter debate with, or I commented, and it was actually quoted in one of the Kosovo medias. I'm very grateful for that. So and also then Patrushev is the head of the Russian Security Council, or of the Secret Services, whatever it is. He has already made the case for Ukraine. So it's very important in this kind of insecurity, after everybody is a bit shell-shocked, what it exactly means, the fall of Kabul, not to get worried, but also to have clarity in the definition of Western interests and what we really need to have peace in Europe. And these 5 countries must be in the EU to have peace in Europe. And in NATO, obviously. So first in NATO, all countries must be first in NATO and then in the EU. And also to have the euro, by the way. I made that case already. But I will do the euro talk with the EU flag in the background. So what is now very much needed is very logical. I think it's also that we explain the Moldovans, the Georgians, and the Ukrainians that the Western interest is also limited. Yeah? The patience is also limited. As you have seen very much with Kabul, there is no willingness, and it was always what I explained in Ukraine, and they were so angry. There was no willingness for World War III with the Russians for Eastern Germany, nor for Hungary in 56 and 53, and in all these terrible years when the Soviets cracked down on Eastern Europe so hard, when the people wanted to leave and then they were killed. And the Americans did about nothing for the Hungarians, for the Eastern Germans, for the Poles, because there was no kind of realistic way beside a full-scale war, and that is not going to happen. So again, I make it very clear. Crimea and Donbass, the occupied parts of Ukraine, and also the occupied regions of Georgia and the occupied region of Moldova, all these Russian-occupied regions, they are history for now. This has to be stabilized, frozen, and then they were like small GDRs for the time being. I know that's very deeply unpopular in Ukraine, and they prefer unity over NATO membership. But it's the wrong choice. Like Germany has done it, BDR under Adenauer. Adenauer preferred Western integration towards unity. He was called a traitor, but they did it together. It was first a currency reform and then introduction of the mark. That's why I promote so much also the euro as currency for Ukraine and for Moldova and for Georgia and for Bosnia also. And so it's very logical to repeat exactly that role model. And then in an undetermined future, like it was 30 years ago, when there is this kind of close to civil war in Russia about the future between the Democrats and between the KGB, which in 1991 the Democrats won under Yeltsin. And then in 2000 and in 99, it was the return of the KGB. And so Russia was lost for democracy for now, but there will be some other struggle like this in the future. And then all these kind of occupied territories can rejoin the NATO members, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, which by then are also in the European Union. Exactly in one day it can be done, because these are federal states like Saxony. They can all vote with a decision of their institutions. They can then join back into Ukraine, but already then automatically becoming member of NATO and in the EU. That is in the Euro. And that's the way this has to be done. And so the short-term aim that anybody is helping for Reconquista of Crimea and of Abkhazia and any Western soldier, I think you can really watch how this is going now in Kabul. You must be delusionary if anybody thinks that. Obviously, that will be never recognized, these annexations, and this will be always condemned. And that will be always fought for the human rights of the people who the Russians are now mistreating. But it's not the case that anybody will move any military asset for any of them. If Russia would really move further, that is also not excluded. Okay, then there would be, of course, a military response of Ukraine, and then there would be also possible some significant support. Yeah? I wouldn't exclude it. But it's, of course, wrong to go down that rabbit hole. The real future is that there will be no further wars. The wars will be now frozen, and the status quo will be now made semi-permanent. And that's exactly what we did during the Cold War. And when you think that Russia is an evil empire, and when you think that Russia is wrong, and I think like that, and then it is the Cold War since 2008, then the logic is very clear that we have to freeze these conflicts. We have then to treat Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova like we have done the Western German states in 48, introduce the euro and federal constitution, preparing for future unity, but at the moment to have NATO accession. And that is absolutely the way for peace in Europe. That's what I promote all the time. And I'm not, anyhow, I said already, not the official spokesman of NATO. I just love NATO, and I think we live in peace because of it in Europe. And we see the alternatives when there is no permanent alliance system, when the American allegiance depends on the political will, and that can be always influenced by Russia via the Trumpian side of the GOP. And also a lot of people in America obviously are no longer so interested in projecting power. From the libertarians to the left, they never liked the foreign wars. And so, of course, it's also very expensive. And, you know, it's now 20 years ago that September 11 happened, and all the reasoning why Afghanistan was so necessary is, of course, long past in a sense. Obviously, we should never forget the heroes and the victims of these tragic days of September. But obviously then to sustain a mission in Afghanistan, which ultimately now was no longer bringing a political agreement in any sense closer, and everybody rejecting my proposal of a division of Afghanistan, because still in the beginning of August I have posted we could have saved at least eastern Afghanistan, and that would have been the division, but the politicians of Afghanistan are also not so much in favor of that one. The difference to Yugoslavia was obviously that their division and independence of the various republics of Slovenia, Bosnia, Croatia was carried by the elites of the regions. They really wanted to have that. But this is not the case in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan we can really do very little but helping concretely, and the few people who really want and need help by evacuating them, and I think that's now ongoing. So the real thing is to focus NATO again on the real mission and to make Ukraine, to reform Ukraine in a condition, and also Kosovo, Bosnia, Moldova and Georgia, And ultimately then in a later stage also Serbia, once it's ready for that, but at the moment they are not, obviously. So it's ultimately exactly the moment where we need to pursue NATO enlargement very fast, efficiently and consequently. And first of all, if the Ukrainians, Georgians and Moldovans don't make the priority decision of West integration by sacrificing the lost provinces and making that more or less official for the time being. I remember the Germans have never given up unity as a state objective in the constitution, but they didn't pursue unity as an active goal that they had anyhow. They knew they had no chance, and so doesn't Russia or Georgia. But there is this kind of delusionary policy ongoing, and because the wounds are fresh, and then a lot of people there in the politics, they promise reunification as an achievable medium-term goal. I don't know, no, certainly not with American power, and certainly not with American forces. That should be very clear to anybody. In a way, also this withdrawal from Afghanistan is much more expression of very clear consolidation of American power on what really is achievable. And if Ukraine wants unachievable things, it will not be part of NATO. Bosnia and Kosovo can be. And anyhow, Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova have never really shown goodwill by recognizing Kosovo. That was also completely a disappointment for me, because I thought they really want to be part of the West. But in Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova, unfortunately, they have this feeling that they know exactly what they want and the West should do what they want. And they will explain us how it is. And, of course, that's a kind of a tragic. And, there was certainly a lot of Afghan politicians who also told a lot of American and European politicians and diplomats what is not possible and what they want. And now they are on the run. And their supporters are fleeing and under most terrible conditions. So you, in this kind of world of big power conflict, you have to make your choices to which camp you belong. And when you think you can balance everybody out, like Serbia, like Armenia, like Afghanistan also, they were from a long time now already observer in the CSTO and in the Shanghai Cooperation and they were not so pro-Western country, let's be honest, in many ways. And they were highly corrupt. Wherever that's obviously then afterwards always an easy excuse of the Western elite. And they say, and by the way, they were corrupt. Yeah, so they have deserved their destiny, forget them. There's also a lot of corruption in Austria and in many European countries and in the US as well. So let's not get too excited on that one. What is the real reason? I've made many times the point. This is the structural lack of cohesion of Afghanistan. So in that way it cannot work, and always one group imposing the will on the others. And we should not be the status quo upkeeper of such structural disaster countries like Afghanistan. Yeah? That it was not the mission of NATO ever. We helped the Americans out of this feeling of solidarity after 9/11, but it was never, it was never part of the planning. It was just an additional thing to which was never really very much backed by the European population overall to have such a mission in Afghanistan. And then it was explained with many complicated arguments, and it was also good, because nation building can work if the nation you want to build is structural cohesive, like in Kosovo now, like in Bosnia to a lesser extent. But also when you have a very complicated nation where there is no cohesiveness, then obviously you build on sand as a fundament for such efforts, and then ultimately the structural incoherence of such countries tears it apart, or leads to such a kind of imbalances that building a real working democracy is impossible, and then only the most brutal wins in this kind of internal civil wars which we face now in Afghanistan. So despite all these terrible pictures, let's not get too excited in terms of criticizing Biden. And also let's be realistic that we can complain a lot, but we have also 20 years of warning. We were 20 years engaged as Europeans in Afghanistan. We don't even have the capacities to really fly our people out whenever the whole thing was now since 2020 decided in the Doha Agreement. Remember when Pompeo kissed all the Talibans in Doha and made peace with them. Yeah? So it is not that anybody can claim surprise the European leadership, and it was announced for May that the withdrawal already, and that the Americans didn't want to restart a big war in 2021 was also quite logically, and not at least because Trump has made this peace agreement, and he would have been more than happy to campaign against a warmongering Biden. Now they will of course blame the chaotic withdrawal to him, and it could be obviously better managed. But the main thing, which is now the real battle, we have to make sure that the debate about Kosovo, Bosnia, Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova in NATO is really picking up steam, and that either Biden in his second part of, also after the midterm elections, is getting the 5 countries in, or we then have to really look who could be the next Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush to win this Cold War after Biden. If he is not up to the task to enlarging NATO, then there will be the next president. And then we have to absolutely make sure also that the pro-NATO president is elected who is ready for the task to make sure that NATO has 5 more members, and obviously in the optimum also the Swedish and the Finnish and the Irish and the Maltese and the Cyprus and of course the Austrians, because then we would be much stronger. If you see that the European Union is spending 233 billion euros every year on defense, and we get so little for it, we have no capacities, we have no aircraft carriers, we have very little transport aircraft capacities. The EU itself doesn't have any. It's Borrell who had to plead with the Prime Minister of Spain to take out the EU officials and local staff from Kabul now, and thankfully he did. And so as long as we are anyhow so decapacitated in a way, and because we are spending so much money, but we are spending it uselessly in German, French, Spanish, Italian extravaganzas, uncoordinated and basically futile. So we will never be a geostrategic actor in that sense. And I think the defeat of Kabul has made that much clearer, that what is really necessary is that the EU joins NATO. This is the real necessity now, and the conclusion, and that we start to spend more money together for defense via the EU budget process in the European Parliament. So from the 130 at the minimum now by this mandate should be spent, we should change the financial framework, spend 50 billion a year in defense on the European level, and then over time in the next 10-15 years to spend all the money via the EU process. There can be armies of the member states, but the budget, the costs must be shared together. It makes utterly no sense to have a Belgian army, whatever, Luxembourg army, Polish. No. They can be armies, but the funding, all the procurement, all the payment, this must be unified. Otherwise, we are like fools. I think that is not the plan, And then there will be over time also one European army with aircraft carriers, a navy, and also a decent airlifting capacity, and we will no longer be clowns, because at the moment we are. And that's of course very bad. Anyhow, my statement here is very clear. It's important to enlarge NATO, and to have Bosnia and Kosovo immediately in the European NATO and also as EU candidate countries, and the potential candidate status of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, and also of the NATO membership for these 3 countries if they choose the Western integration on the Western German model, and they freeze the conflicts with Russia, and because we cannot have these conflicts imported into NATO, obviously. Good. I think that's very clear. I think I said what I wanted to say. Thanks a lot for my little improvise. And don't worry, NATO is strong. It's the strongest military alliance, but we were a little bit out of area and we overstayed our welcome. And the country itself was not ready for all this support because they had no clarity what kind of country or countries they want to be. And then it's very hard to help. There must be clarity in the purpose of the nation. Then you can help it. Then you can nation build it. If there's a wide shared consensus on what the future should be, then investment makes sense. If that's totally unclear where the direction goes, obviously additional investment will be, and now for the Chinese, they will do their try in Afghanistan, and it will be not very successful as well. Good. So far from now, from Pax Europiana. In September, I will do podcast again more, but now I will continue with my video messages here, and I will try to bring one daily commentary about the situation online. And thanks a lot for my little improvised. And by the way, Austria joined NATO. More to come. All the best. Bye.